Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's edition of Florida Makes webinar. Your webinar series for today is featuring a key program for Florida Makes, which is what we call the Manufacturer of the Year. And as you can see in the slide there, that it had been developing for years. Oh, I freeze. Am I back?
We can hear you.
Okay, I'm sorry. It's freezing. So I took off my video, everybody. So we are pleased to present to you our Vice President for Client Engagement for today's topic. Next slide, please, Patricia. Florida Makes its mission is to strengthen and advance Florida's manufacturing economy. And our vision as your manufacturing extension partnership is to have Florida be recognized as a global leader in manufacturing. Next slide, please. You will, these are some new words for everybody. We're excited to start bringing in this revised, modified, enhanced messaging for how Florida Makes is seen in the state and in the country. So how do we help manufacturers in the state of Florida? We are really your objective third-party providers. And we are your business advisors for Florida manufacturers because we are manufacturing experts. There's a whole host of us behind me here in Florida Makes that are really your experts, very knowledgeable in all the facets of manufacturing in the manufacturing world. And we are also your connectors because we connect you with all the many resources that we have available as part of the Florida Makes network. Look at us as your problem solvers for our manufacturers. Hopefully, many of you are engaging with us already. To our network partners, I know that you work with us and get us engaged in your business retention and expansion work. So we are your accelerator for the Florida Makes manufacturing industry in the state. So those are our six key bullets. So for today's key takeaways, this is the MOTY Award. So Michael will be presenting the detailed overview of the program because we want you to be familiar with the process for MOTY and then understand the expectations and outcomes from being a participant in the process. It's a wonderful process, really. Michael will tell you more about it. And then you have to get an understanding of the commitment in participating in the process. And then also learn how being part of MOTY will transform and elevate your company. I know we have some use cases that Micah will share with you. So without further ado, here is Micah Doherty, our Vice President for Client Engagement. And he's got a lot of material and some very detailed slides to share with you. Go ahead and switch over to Micah's slide. Micah, go ahead and share with us your message. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ruth. Thank you, team. Can everybody see the compass on there? We'll make sure that I did this right.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So I like to consider the manufacturer of the year process. Really, it's a recognition of excellence. You know, we're really focusing on the manufacturers and you know what you all are doing well, and also where those areas of opportunity may be for you to improve your processes. So as Ruth mentioned, you know, this is part of the Florida Makes network. These the Manufacturer of the Year programs are run regionally. This is not a statewide program. This is something that is run in each of the regions. We have several that are, you know, going on right now. Southeast Florida, the South Florida Manufacturers Association wrapped theirs up a couple weeks ago. We have the Bay Area Manufacturers Association, Southwest Florida in Lee County, SRMA. So, you know, we are running these programs around the state, and they have so far been very successful. Florida Makes Just a little information for those of you on the call that may not know who we are. We are a public-private partnership with the mission to strengthen and advance Florida's manufacturing economy. We are the Manufacturing Extension Partnership Center for the state of Florida, and we are part of the national network of MEPs that are managed by the National Institute of Standards and Technologies. So let's dive in. What is the Manufacturer of the Year Award? The Manufacturer of the Year Award was fashioned after the Baldrige Quality Award of Excellence, which is a national award that is handed out to manufacturers for really their excellence in manufacturing. So in keeping, I guess in good faith with, with the process, which is a very good process, we decided to, probably about 10 years ago or so, we revamped this, and we've continually, in the spirit of continuous improvement, continue to improve this process year after year, looking for what changes Baldrige has made, and really what are the industry trends? What is it that manufacturers should really be focusing on as they move forward and advance their own businesses? So the awards process actually started in South Florida with the South Florida Manufacturers Association several decades ago. But since then, once again, it has been revamped several times to what it's really become today, and how we've benefited these manufacturers, who participated in this event. It's really important. The participation in this is you're going to get out of it what you put into it, is what I always say. So if you go in thinking, oh, this is just another award process, you're not going to be very successful. You really have to take this by heart, go into it with an open mind, and really go in trying to step outside of your company for a minute and looking at yourself and being very objective with yourself as this examiner team comes in to review you. Since 2022, when we started really tracking the impacts, specifically from the SFMA's Manufacturer of the Year Awards process, there have been 70 unique companies, 70 different companies that have participated in this event. Those participating companies, that have seen the process through its entirety and received the assessment report at the end, have realized a combined $450 million in financial and operational impact, as well as impacting over 1,500 jobs. Now, this is a very impressive, a very important number. Once again, yes, there are some large companies in there, but there are a lot of small companies in there who've really seen their businesses be transformed by going through this process. By the way, these impacts, these are validated through a third-party survey, that the participants complete about 6 months to 1 year after participating in the Manufacturer of the Year Awards process. So they're not just made up numbers. So let's talk about the process. Let's dive in. It really all is going to begin with the nomination process. So the way this works is the process will open up, the nomination process will open up, and you may be nominated by Florida Makes or a regional manufacturing association, partner organizations like an economic development council, business development board. It could be your bank, could be another manufacturer. It could be your vendor, could be your customer. And if you really want to participate and really want to get the full benefit of this award, you can nominate yourself. And, I think it's really important to understand that it's getting into this process and going through it is really what counts. Once you are nominated, then obviously you have a decision to make. Do you want to accept this nomination? Do you want to decline the nomination? I'm going to say this comment again. Those that decline, I hear this a lot. They'll say, well, we're not really ready to go through this, and we need to prepare. Yeah, if you recognize that you're not ready to go through the process, you really are ready to go through the process. That's the benefit. You want this third-party objective team of examiners to come in, evaluate your company, and really, take a look from top to bottom of what's going on and how we can help you. So once you accept the nomination, and this is really important, there's a form that you'll receive from whichever organization or whichever region you're in. We call it an organizational profile. This profile is a guide. It's a guide for the lead examiner in the process. It's a guide for the examiner team, because there are a lot of companies out here that we may have never engaged with. And we need to understand a little bit more about this company, that we're going in to see. So really, when you get this organizational profile, you have to complete it to its fullest. We're not looking for financial information. We're not looking for anything that's proprietary. It's really just some basic information and maybe a little bit of detailed information as well, but we really want to understand who you are. And once these organizational profiles are submitted, they will be reviewed by the lead examiner, to make sure that everything that is, that we need to have on there is on this profile. So, this has to be completed to its fullest, as I mentioned. Blank spreadsheets, name, address, phone number will not be accepted. Some things that are very important. Number one, we need to know how large you are. How many employees do you have? Because if you're in an area where there's going to be a lot of companies participating in this, we typically divide this up not by industry, but typically by employee headcount. So I think it's really important that everybody understands that. And we're not looking at it as a global view, because if you're let's say a subsidiary or a satellite plant of a larger organization that's nationwide or even worldwide, international, we're only looking at the plant that you're at. So, you could have 30 people in your facility, but the overall organization could be 10,000 if you're international. So we're really only looking at how many folks are at your facility in Florida. Kind of talked about that already, just reiterating it, that the organizational profile is a guideline for the MOTY examiner team. We really need to understand more about your company. This is a valuable tool for all of the examiners and the lead examiner to really understand who you are. So what is some of the information that goes into this organizational profile? Yes, we need to know the basics. We need to know, where you're at, how to contact you, who the main contact, that we'll be reaching out to set up the interview process. The number of employees, of course, is very important. Mission, vision, core values. As those of you who already know me, I'm very big on mission, vision, and core values. And mission is really, why do you exist? And from there, that's where it's a foundation of the business. It's a foundation of the company. Everything is really going to spread out like a web from there. How does technology play a role? How does innovation play a role within your organization? Strategically, what are your strategic challenges? What are your strategic advantages? How do you differentiate yourself from your competition? What industries do you serve? What markets are you playing in? What is your strategic planning process? How do you go about making those day-to-day decisions and looking to the future and positioning your company? How do you measure the business? Very important. One of my favorite sayings is if you're not measuring it, you're just practicing. So, but we also want to know, are you measuring the right things? Maybe you're not measuring what you should be measuring. How do you benchmark your business? How do you invest in your workforce? What risks exist to the business, and how are you addressing these risks? Supply chain management. That's a really important process, is becoming more important in today's day and age with tariff situation. Supply chain is always going to be a big thing. And regulatory environment, industry certifications. Is there somebody else that or another organization that you are being, I'll call it, managed by, or you manage to this certification and process? These are just a few of the things that go into this organizational profile, but it does really give us a very good view of who your company is and what you do. Once again, the nominees, if the group is large enough, we will like to separate those, because realistically, it is very difficult for a company of 15 or 20 people to compete against a company with 500 people. There's a lot of layers. There's a lot of, organizational development in a company with 500 employees. Not to say that you won't have that with 15, but there's a significant difference. So we want to try to separate that and really keep everybody on an even playing field. Total number of groups that will be in the process is obviously going to depend on how many accepted nominations we have, how many companies are participating, and then those groups will just be decided from there based on their employee headcount. So let's talk about the meat of the process. We look at 6 business categories, and honestly, this isn't a manufacturing, solely a manufacturing process. This can be used in banking. This can be used in real estate. This can be used in really any business. And these 6 business categories are relevant in every business. But for our purposes, obviously, we're focusing on manufacturing. So we're going to be looking at leadership and strategy, customer focus, technology innovation, how you measure the business, workforce, how do you develop your workforce, how do you sustain your workforce, and then, of course, operationally, operational excellence. What do you look like in operations? So briefly talking about leadership and strategy, here's just, really, this is a 30,000-foot view of what we're looking at. But once again, here's mission, vision, core values. We're going to look at that. We're going to look at communication. How does leadership communicate strategic objectives? How do they communicate their mission, vision, and value? What is that level of communication up the ladder, down the ladder? How does it work? Accountability. How does the organization, approach accountability? How is leadership held accountable for, reaching strategic objectives? And how do they hold others accountable for also supporting and reaching those objectives as well? Mentoring. Big believer in leadership being mentors, to those, individuals that have an interest, obviously, in moving up the corporate chain. But at the same time, how are the leaders being mentored? What is happening on their end? I mean, you have to look at both sides of it. What roles does leadership play in the organization? Do you have an organizational chart? Is it defined? Obviously, legal, ethical behavior. What is the process? Risk and succession planning. Environmental impacts. Does the company really take? Are you good stewards of the environment? Is really what I'm looking for. And as well, are you good stewards of the society? How is the company really involved? From a societal viewpoint, and then, of course, the strategic planning process. And how do you roll out your strategies and objectives? Looking at customer focus, a lot of importance here. Culture of the customer. Does your organization have a culture of the customer? Meaning, is it really, how customer focused and oriented are you? Are the employees on the shop floor, not just from the leadership side or sales and marketing, but how do the shop floor workers actually engage and interact somehow with the customers? Voice of the customer, very important. Are you listening to what the customer is saying? Customer satisfaction. Does the customer get involved in new products? What is that communication level going between the companies with voice of the customer? Market definition, customer market definition, very important. I probably could define this a little bit better myself. It's really more about diversity in your customer base. Do you have 2 customers that make up 80% of your business? That's not a very diversified portfolio. It's something that, we obviously want to look at. And how do we really break that out to where you don't have too much risk in one place, because that can happen. Accountability. Who is accountable for customer growth? Who is accountable for going out and finding new business? How do you find new business? What does that strategy look like? Understand your competition. What makes you different? What makes your company different from the company down the road that makes the same product? So looking at those differentiators. So these are some of the areas in customer focus. Technology and innovation. This is a technological world today, folks. Honestly, there's not too many companies I could say that I've been in in the last 5 years that haven't had some form of technology. Whether it's an ERP system, whether, now we're getting into more and more AI, automation, looking at how is technology playing a real function in manufacturing, in the administrative processes. How is it used in communication with employees, with the customer, with your vendors, with, your stakeholders? How is technology and innovation used in strategic planning? And actually, is innovation or technology part of your strategic planning process? Have you looked at your processes and say, well, I really think I could do a little bit better here with, some automation, or maybe we can use, some form of AI, or we need an ERP system. And then you have to put a plan together, an action plan as part of that strategic process to be able to move the company into, the technological world. How does technology and innovation play a role in collecting data? The old school, I grew up in the old school, steel mill in West Virginia. And our logbooks were all written by hand. And I couldn't tell you how many times, we used to do physical inventory once a week. It was never accurate. This is a great way. Technology is going to eliminate that human factor, human error, not the human factor, the human error, because a big misconception on technology and innovation is that, the robots are going to take over and there's not going to be people working in factories anymore. It's not true. There still has to be people there to program these the robotics, the automation, and maintenance to work on it. Still going to have operators, still going to happen. So don't think that this is, taking people out of their jobs. Cybersecurity, that's a big one, part of technology today. And this doesn't go just for those companies that really are handling CUI, confidential information, working with DoD or government. This is everybody. It's so easy for these hackers today to get through your cell phones, get through your emails, and one wrong click, and all of a sudden, your world is turned upside down. And so it's really important to understand cybersecurity and be working towards keeping all of your information, all of your employees' information, all of your proprietary information. Wow, that's a tongue tire. All of this needs to be protected. So it doesn't matter what kind of company you are. Moving on into measurement. How do we measure the business? Remember what I said earlier. If you're not measuring it, you're just practicing. So be sure you're measuring what's important. Your strategic plan really should be directing what you're measuring. That's where your KPIs should be developed. You should be tying everything back to that strategic plan, which, by the way, should be tied to your mission statement. Your strategy needs to support the mission. Your KPIs need to support the strategic plan. This is really the roadmap for the business. So it's really important to understand that. Measure what's important. Manage your KPIs. How do you benchmark the business? It's a form of measurement. And, there's a lot of companies I hear it, we're unique. Nobody else makes what we make. Well, there are things you can benchmark against. You still have operations, you still have administration. How can you benchmark some of those things, and look at what others are doing to make yourselves better? How do you communicate performance? Very big. Is it verbal communication, saying this is what your goals? Is it visual communication? And there's visual communication to even different extents. How often are you updating everything? Is the data accurate that you're actually collecting? And what are you doing with this data when you receive it? Are you using this to drive business decisions? Are you using this data to drive continuous improvement? It's to collect data, to just collect data doesn't mean anything. You need to do something with it. And that ties back into measuring what is important, because if you're measuring something that's irrelevant to the business, it's really a wasted activity. Workforce. So a big one, how do you know if your employees are happy? I mean, it's not just turnover rate, there's more. How are you communicating with employees? Are you really understanding who they are, what they do, where do they want to be in the company? understanding their capabilities. Are they capable of going to, this position? Do they need training, additional training? How well are you training your employees? Not only that, is it education? If somebody has a need or a desire to move into a different position, they want to become an engineer. Does your company offer these types of programs? What is your process for recruiting? What is your process for onboarding? How about safety policy, safety procedures, safety training, driving the performance? How are you driving performance and communicating? Once again, communication of performance, with the employees. So, and that all comes down to the last two: development and engagement of the workforce. So all of those previous topics really support that. Finally, operations. We'll look at supply chain management. How do you meet your customers' requirements and the market requirements? How do you manage internal and external resources? And I'm going to step back to supply chain management. Supply chain is not just external. You have an internal supply chain. How are you moving product from one operation to the next? Is there communication going on as that's happening? Obviously, continuous improvement. The data we're collecting, are we doing something with it? Are we making moves to improve the business? Do you understand your costs? Big one. There's a lot of companies that don't really understand what their true cost recognition is of the product. Might be undervaluing what you're doing. Business continuity, business risk. Is your company prepared for, look, we live in Florida. Are you prepared for a hurricane? What happens if a hurricane comes through and shutters your operations for a week? Are you still going to be able to supply your customers? What happens? And that's just one piece of business continuity and risk. There's a lot of other things. Losing key individuals in the organization. Somebody leaves, that played a major role. Do they have a backup? Just another example of business risk. So let's talk about process for a moment. This is a data-driven assessment review of your company is really what we're looking at. And we're going to focus on process. So the lead examiner, the examiner team, as they conduct their evaluation, that's what they're looking for. And we're not talking about necessarily the manufacturing process. We're looking for the functions of how you're getting from point A to point B. It's the decision making, it's the why, it's the how you're doing certain functions within the organization, within that criteria, and within those categories of let's call them business funnels, if you will, that we just went over. So this is really important because this is how you're once you start learning the whole process of this, that's how it's going to position yourself to be a world-class organization. So scoring, it's data-driven. Once again, this is a data-driven process. Each one of these categories will be scored, and actually each piece of criteria that the examiner team is looking for within each of these categories is going to be scored. There's 44 total questions. As of this year's Manufacturer of the Year Awards process, there were 44 questions spread over these 6 categories. There's 3 components to each question, and each one of those components are being scored. So that means that an examiner team of 5, they're going to have 132 scores per examiner. So there's a lot of scoring going on there if you do the math. So it's very data driven. Talking about the 3 elements, I'll kind of go over this a little bit. The 3 elements are approach and deployment, integration, and learning. Have to understand what these mean. So let's talk about approach and deployment. So approach is the method, the how your organization is carrying out its processes. The deployment is really what your organization applies, to that process in order to, move it forward. So they work hand in hand. In essence, I like to say, do you have a process? And how well is that process established? What is the method by the way you're doing that? So we talked about communication. There's verbal communication. There's visual communication. So, there's a significant difference between the two of those. Now you throw a little bit of technology in there and it becomes even more advanced. So that's how the scores move from a 1 to a 2 to a 3 to a 4 to a 5. Integration. I'm going to read this word for word because I actually love the definition. Integration is defined as the harmonization of plans, processes, information, resource decisions, workforce capacity and capability, actions, results, measures, and analysis to support key organization-wide goals. It's a mouthful, but think about it. It's the harmonization. Is this process sustainable? If I bring somebody in from off the streets, can I train them to learn this process in a couple of days? Maybe not, certain things, but you really think about if it's a sustainable process, it should be easy to learn. It should really flow nicely. So you have a process. Now the process is further defined, and it's defined in the terms of sustainability with all of those aspects being kept in mind. In learning, toughest score to get, to be honest with you. It's really, what are you doing with the knowledge? What are you doing with the data? Are you using this to advance the company forward? Making improvements, looking at new technology, innovation. It's truly learning. It's really what you're doing with this data to make the company better, make the process better in this specific case. So scoring, once again, based on a rating of 1 through 5, 1 meaning lacking a process or, no visibility of a process, very minimal. 2, the process exists, but, you're still not quite there. There's a lot of loose ends. There's a lot of maybe human factor put into it. Once again, verbal communication versus written communication. There's no standardizations. 3 is middle of the road. That's what I call status quo. You're doing what everybody else is doing, which there's nothing wrong with that, but you're not becoming innovative. You're not thinking outside the box. You're not moving the company in a new direction, to really advance the company positively. You're just kind of treading water, for a lack of better terms. You get into a score of 4, now you're borderline innovative. Now you're starting to look at technology. You're starting to look into innovation, and innovation doesn't have to be technology. Innovation is that thinking outside the box, doing something different that others aren't doing to achieve a goal, to make the process better, to really make the process sustainable and successful. And you're really on the borderline of achieving breakthrough results. And a 5, you're really considered the benchmark, for that process, meaning, I would want other companies to come in and look at this process and say, hey, look at how they're doing it over here. It's perfect. You really need to adopt something like that. That means it's not to say you're perfect, because nobody's ever perfect. Remember, we're always striving for perfection, but we never reach it. And that's the old lean way. So, but the benchmark means that you've achieved everything that you could, but you're still looking to make it better. So at the end of all of this, what happens? So here's a few things that will be going on. The winners, if your region, should be conducting some type of a ceremony to really recognize and reward all of the participants, for their excellence in manufacturing. And at that time, that's also going to be where, the awards will be handed out to the winners in their different groups. So I think that's very important to know that. And those dates, will all be determined by your, by your region. So talked a lot about the process, but I get a lot of this question is, why should I participate? What's in it for me? So let's talk about a testimonial first. And this is really going into what's in it, for me. Fortress Marine Anchors is a small manufacturer in Fort Lauderdale, 11, 13 people. They were in group 1. They participated 3 years in a row, and before they finally won it. And it's really, it's really important to understand you might not go in and win the first time, but they really took this process to heart. They took the feedback from the assessment that was given to them after, and they really moved forward with it and started making changes, started transforming the organization. What happened? They saw their sales increase by 15%, mostly coming from export into new markets where that was a recommendation, and we gave them some recommendations on what they should do, who they should contact, how they should go about looking at that strategy to go into an international market. Retaining 30% of existing customer revenues. They did that through improving some of the processes. There was a lot of, I won't say there were quality issues, but there were some issues internally, that internal quality that was corrected before it got to the client, but it created delays. So now you're looking at risk to the business because you might not be delivering your product on time. Improving, overall operational costs. Improving some of these processes, improving the flow. They realized the savings of really about 15% overall. They invested a couple $100,000 into the business, and so I guess it's 14 employees, and they retained the entire workforce because they felt that there was a lot at risk if they didn't make some of these changes. So what did they do? This is I actually took this excerpt right from Chris Albert from Fortress Marine. And he stated, for the past 3 years, Fortress Anchors has proudly competed in the South Florida Manufacturers Association's Manufacturer of the Year awards process. 2024, they were honored to win in the Microgiants category, which was Group 1 to 20 employees, a moment that validated years of hard work, but perhaps even more valuable than the award itself was the journey. Participating as a contestant, and then he also participated as an examiner to evaluate other companies and learn a little bit more and benchmark. Those experiences gave him a rare behind-the-scenes look into what makes a great manufacturer, what holds others back, and then here were the 5 lessons that he took. 1, without a mission and vision, core values, flying blind. Clearly defined and well-communicated mission, vision, core values aren't corporate fluff. They're operational GPS. Companies that excel in the SFMA's MOTY process live their values. They aren't supposed to just be some platitudes plastered on a wall that everyone can see. They need to be integrated at every level, informing your team's KPIs and daily decisions about how your organization conducts business. Everyone from the shop floor to the C-suite understands why they exist, where they're going, and how they're going to get there. When the mission, vision, core values are missing, you see it in the confusion, the cultural drift, the reactive decision-making. Codifying ours, meaning Fortress Anchors, was a turning point for the company. It helped them to align hiring, performance, and customer service with a shared purpose. If I didn't say any other statement other than this one, this is the most powerful statement that Chris mentioned here and how it helped him. Benchmarking isn't optional, it's essential. So I'm not going to read all this because I know I'm running, kind of short on time, but benchmarking is important because it gives you the opportunity to measure yourself against competition, against others, even outside of your industry, but are doing the same types of processes maybe. So it's really important to do this benchmarking. So I encourage manufacturers to participate as examiners, because that's the benefit that you're going to get from this. You're going to get an opportunity to see other companies and what they do and how they do it. Finding sacred cows, be willing to kill them. This is great because this kind of comes back a little bit to, tribal knowledge for one thing. Obviously, the way we've always done it is, we're not going to change because, well, it's worked for the last, 40 years. Why should we change now? You got to be willing to change. Change is important. It's really being a change agent is being transformational to your business. Yeah, you might have some pain for a while, but making that change is important. And I think that's where Chris was going at with this is, he recognized through this process, through some of the recommendations, through being an examiner, that there were a lot of things that they had done the same way all the time, every time for the existence of the business. And he recognized that to get better, they have to take it outside the box and move forward and make change. Key person dependency is a ticking time bomb. Another point. Well, that's more the tribal knowledge. Having one person that understands everything in the business, it's not a good thing. You really need to have standardized documentation, have a playbook, have something you can go back to. Get this tribal knowledge, pull it out of the person, put it on paper, and then make it a standardized process. If it's not written down, it doesn't exist. That's a great statement right there at the bottom. Chris went forward, created a skills manual that is fantastic. And this is one of those areas that, this wasn't automation. This wasn't, some great grand technology. This was true innovation. This was thinking outside the box. Created a very detailed skills manual of every single operation and job function with photos. It breaks down the language barriers. So it really gave them an opportunity. One, as they onboard new employees and they have on the job training, they have a manual now that they can look at and they can visually see this is how we change this tooling. This is what the quality should look like on this. This is how you measure, with calipers and so forth. This is how you use a caliper. So there's a lot of things that they put into this training manual. Fantastic job. No problem you're facing is unique. I think this is one of the things that everybody has to realize, one, about your manufacturing associations, about Florida Makes. You as a manufacturer are not alone. Your problems are not unique. You have an issue, reach out, get some help. To the point Ruth made at the beginning of this webinar today, we're connectors. Florida Makes Business Advisors, the whole Florida Makes organization. We're connectors. We're problem solvers. We're accelerators. These are things that we do for manufacturers. I never like to use the word consultant, and I won't use the word consultant because that's not what we are. Consultants want to stay and they want to become an ingrained piece of your business. We're an accelerator. We want to come in and help you solve your problem quickly so you can get back to doing what you do best, and it's manufacturing, as quickly as possible. That's what's important. So these are the 5 points that Chris made, and I think they're great. So Chris, if you're watching, thank you. You're awesome. Final thoughts from Chris. It's not, this Manufacturer of the Year award process is not just a trophy contest. It's a mirror. It forces you as a manufacturer to reflect on what you do well and where you need to grow, whether you're competing, benchmarking, whatever it may be. It's a journey, and the journey is worth it. To any manufacturer out there that's watching this right now, when this process comes to your area, don't sit on the fence about it. Jump in and do it. Get in. You might win the award, you might not. But it's the learning process as you go through it. That's the real reward. It's the assessment at the end. It's, the benchmarking. It's the knowledge that you gain. Showed this slide a little bit earlier about the impact since 2002. We've had $450 million in financial operational impact to organizations, as well as impacting over 1,500 jobs. This process, the proof is in the pudding. There's value. It's there. Remember, companies participating you're going to get out of this process what you are willing to put into it. Kind of what I said at the beginning on the organizational profile. If you think that this is just another awards process, you're not going to get much out of it. So, you need to be open-minded, accept it with open arms, and embrace everything. Look in the mirror, as Chris said. Look in the mirror and look at the reflection and look back at the company and where you're at and where you want to be. So I mentioned the assessment a couple of times. There is a detailed assessment. That is this is where, everything that was compiled during the whole evaluation process, that the lead examiner and the examiner team saw, interviewed you on. All of this will be detailed for you. Your scores will be there. You'll have a comparison of your scores against those like your group, as well as the whole field. But more importantly, looking at your strengths, looking at your opportunities, and looking at where those areas of opportunities and recommendations that this examiner team has for you to make improvements and take your business to the next level. That's the real value of being a participant in this process. It's the learning. I said it before and I'll say it again. If you think you're not ready, yes, you are. You already recognize by saying that statement that we're not ready, you know that you have some issues that need to be addressed. Let this objective third-party group of folks come in, do the evaluation, go through the process. I promise you're not going to regret it. Is it the end or the beginning? There is no end. This is a continual process, and it's a journey that you should be on for the long road. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to open it up to questions.
Thank you so much, Micah. That was fabulous. We are excited to have brought you the Manufacturer of the Year award in the webinar.
Yep.
And reiterate, that was, I thought was awesome.
Maybe go off video, Ruth. It might be video.
Am I back?
Yes, you're back. There you are.
Okay, teammates, Teresa and Patricia, if I come out again, feel free to help with the Q&A. But so Micah, wonderful, great testimonial. The 6 business categories are really helpful: leadership, customer focus, technology, workforce, measuring, and operations. So let me go ahead and go to the questions. I know that there was a slide there, Micah, where you shared some of the key things from the organizational profile. A question was asked, are we able to share that ahead of time to the companies?
We could. I mean, we could do that. Yes.
Okay, I guess the question is, they want to make sure. Maybe the question is, can you profile how long a time commitment is it for a participant?
So, yeah, that's okay. So I'm going to answer it the best way I can. I'll start with the interview process. The interview process will take about, probably 3 to 4 hours. If we're on site, it'll probably take about 3 to 4 hours on site. The rest of it, it's kind of, like, for instance, the organizational profile. To go through that organizational profile, you're going to want to involve different people. It can't really be one person, one individual answering those questions. You need a team. You think about the business categories, that's the team that you really need. You need your leaders in the organization. You might need, somebody that has all of the answers in sales, marketing, customer service. You might need to have your operational manager or director of operations, quality, supply chain. So it really does take a team of people to answer the organizational profile. The commitment, I mean, honestly, I think you could probably take a full day to go through the organizational profile with that team if you wanted to sit down behind closed doors. And then the rest of the commitment is, really just preparing the team for the evaluation and the evaluation itself. So the commitment for the benefit is really not that long. I mean, in hours, you might commit 20 hours to this. But the benefit is, way larger than that.
Right, as you've shown with the testimonial from Chris, which was very helpful. Before I transition to the next question, one of our business advisors wants everyone to know that if you are planning to sell your company, this is really a very valuable program in helping to improve your operations and come up with a much better valuation for your business. So thanks for that, Pete. Micah, as far as I know, there is no application fee, correct?
No, this is this is a free service other than the time that you want to devote to it.
Right, right. I do want to caution everybody because we do have a saying, if you don't pay for it, there's a sense of the valuation, how valuable the process is. But I hope we already have shown you and past programs as well that this is the manufacturer award that you want to be part of. And it is not a beauty contest, as our CEO likes to say. This is a very substantial continuous improvement program that we have. The next question I have, Micah, is
Ruth,
can
before we
you?
go on,
Yes.
just real quick, I want to throw this in. This is this just to reiterate, it is free, but the Baldrige Quality Award of Excellence, if memory serves me right, that's like a $25,000 investment just to get your name on a list. There's not even a guarantee you'll be selected to go through the process. So,
Thank you for that. Yes.
so there's a lot of there's value, even the intrinsic value in just that we don't charge for something that Baldrige is charging, quite a bit for.
That's important clarification. Thank you, Micah. So Florida Makes program is free, and you're getting pretty much the same value as you would from the other award. Micah, profile the examiners for our people. Who are they, and what do they do?
Well, first the examiner teams are usually selected by the lead examiner. When I was the lead examiner for the SFMA doing this process, I selected other manufacturers that that really let's put it this way. I selected manufacturers that had knowledge in these different categories. So I might have a CEO who could talk to the leadership side. I might have an operations manager that could talk to the measurement side and the operations side. So I tried to be selective on that. They don't have to be manufacturers. You could select, I'll call them an affiliate or like a bank or a real estate company, an agent or something like that, providing that they have manufacturing experience, because there are, those, for instance, Randstad had several folks from Randstad that were examiners on for the SFMA's manufacturer of the year awards process, but they all worked in that manufacturing business unit and had some level of background for manufacturing. In fact, one of them actually has a degree in industrial engineering, so she was perfect for this.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that, Micah. And kudos from Ronnie. Ronnie, thanks for your positive note. He said, great job, great focus on the metrics. He appreciates what we do. And as you said, Micah, if you don't, I actually want to paraphrase your statement. If we don't measure, you cannot report, right? So metrics
If
is
you don't measure it,
important.
you're just practicing.
Yeah, that's right. But thank you for that note, Ronnie. And there is a question on, I think this is talking about the ERP system from Eileen. Talk about the software systems within manufacturing that can help eliminate paper, manual quality, and operations.
You want me to talk about it?
Yes, you just, yeah. Is it part of the MOTY process, talking about the ERP process or anything like that?
Yes, no, that falls under the technology and innovation side. So we would be looking for, those types of areas, especially once again, on the administrative side, there's a lot of opportunity for technology and AI and things like that to really improve those processes and really improve our efficiencies as individuals that work in those areas. So yes, that is something that would be looked at. And, if it was deemed as a recommendation, it would also be a recommendation that we would work with the company on. Yeah.
So Q&A is very active. Thank you all so much for your questions. Next one we want to talk about is, I think it's Andre. So Micah, will this be done on a regional basis, like through the regional associations? And will we have to be a member in order to participate?
Okay, so yes, this is going to be conducted regionally. If there's a regional manufacturing association that Florida Makes is affiliated with, then most likely yes, it would run through that association, or the hub director. whoever it may be. And the second answer is no. You do not have to be a member of any of the associations to participate in this. This is open to manufacturers statewide. I mean, as far as regionally, whenever we conduct these regionally, you do not have to be a member of an association to participate. As long as you have a manufacturing NAICS code and you are a manufacturer, then you will be able to participate.
Beautiful. And can they self-nominate?
Yes, absolutely. And
Okay.
I'm going to clarify this a little bit. The way I look at self-nominations, Ruth and audience, if you're self-nominating, I'm really making the assumption that you want to go through the process. So it's almost as if you self-nominate, you kind of accepted to go through the process at the same time. So just kind of keep that in mind, that if you self-nominate, you're probably going to go, right to the next step, which would be, getting the organizational profile, getting that information, and needing to fill that out.
Great. And Hussein, you asked a lot of questions. Thank you for that. It looks like we will get in touch with you directly. Yes, it looks like you're ready to engage with us. So go ahead and email me or send us your contact information for your specific area. And you're welcome, Eileen. So Hussein, application dates, we'll send that over to you. And let's see, I'm just going through, make sure did I miss anything? If everybody has a question, we have another minute or two. Okay, something else is coming up. Oh, it's just thank you. Thank you from Hussein and Eileen. I think we covered it all, Micah. So everybody, thank you for joining us. And before I move into my closing slides, Micah, any final words from you, please?
I think the only thing that I can stress, Ruth, and I kind of stress it throughout the whole webinar, is be willing to embrace this process. Once the Manufacturer of the Year Awards process comes to your region and you see that it's there, go through the process. Take the chance. What do you have to lose? To me, I only see the upside of this because, I've seen, not that I'm biased, but I mean, I've seen the value, and hearing stories like Chris Albert's story from Fortress Marine, that's what really makes this process special, is seeing, how manufacturers really embraced the process and used it to, accelerate their business.
Great. Thank you so much, Micah. Thank you all for staying with us. I just have a couple of slides. Patricia, go ahead and switch over to our slides. And I'm sorry all, I'm not showing my video because my bandwidth is having an issue this morning. So while Patricia's putting up the slides, okay, very good. So we hope we have fulfilled to you the 4 key takeaways that we said we were going to do at the beginning. Micah did a great job providing a detailed overview of the MOTY process. And I think everybody has a better understanding of what it entails, the expectations from engaging in the process, and also the outcomes and really the benefits and the value from going through the awards process, and how it can improve your company. So good job on that, Micah. Next slide, please, Miss Patricia. Yeah, we're excited. The next webinar is on July 11th. That's a Friday. We're back to a Friday slot at 10 a.m. We will talk about something very important, which is the CMMC certification, particularly for our manufacturers in the defense industrial base, in the DIB space, as we say. We are so grateful to have Wilson Bautista join us from June Cyber. He will talk about getting assessment ready. So this is important. As many of you know, if you haven't heard about it, the deadline is real. The deadline is coming. To keep your DoD and other federal contracts in place, you will have to have the CMMC level 2 certification, and maybe some level 3s, but most of our manufacturers are the level 2. And that is on Friday, July 11th. Registration is ongoing. Do we have another slide, Ms. Patricia? I think, yeah, just reach out to us. We are your accelerator, as Micah said. We are your connectors. We're your subject matter experts in the field of manufacturing. We're here to help you. Thank you all for joining. The video link will be sent to you right after this. Please fill out the survey and keep sending us your questions on what information you need, because we are here to service our manufacturers, help you grow, and as we grow the manufacturing economy in the state of Florida. With that, I'm gonna go ahead and say goodbye, and I will see you July 11th. Thanks again, Micah.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye, everybody.